We open these interviews the same way, which is, could you introduce yourself and state your name and what it is that you are known for / what you do?
Okay, sure, David. My name is David Greenfield. I tended to go in my career with David M Greenfield. I have no idea why there aren't that many David Greenfields. I was on radio for a few years, but I guess I'm best known for being a game show producer, produced over 25 game shows and probably about 10 or 15 pilots and more presentations. What a presentation is before a network say will give you a pilot deal, they'll say, okay, do us a favor and just put it up on its feet without us building an entire set. So you go to a theater or a rehearsal studio or something like that, and you do a live presentation. And so yeah, all in all, about 30 shows, which sounds great, but you'd rather get one show and do that show for 30 years. A lot easier, but that's not the way game shows generally work.
And we'll talk about that in depth.
Okay.
What is your earliest memory of film or television, having seen it or viewed it?
Well, I go back to radio. Just kidding. I'm not that old. When I was a kid, my first, I would say, and God, I hate them now, but I don't know why. I guess it's weird. I loved violence for some reason. The first Three Stooges and Popeye. Those are my first memories. Three Stooges, we had TV trays, okay, and TV dinners. This is 1962, say 61, something. I was a little kid. I was born in 1954, for those interested, which is right after the Korean War and 3 years into I Love Lucy. So I watched Three Stooges and I love Popeye. I love Popeye so much that, and I had they don't make them anymore, but an inflatable Popeye, which was about as big as me, maybe 4 feet, and it had beanbags at the bottom, okay? But you blew it up, okay, and it was a full-size Popeye, and you could punch Popeye, and Popeye would fall over, and then the beanbags would bring him up. And so I'd be punching Popeye all the time. I don't know why I was so violent about it. And my grandfather, who died when he was just 63, just before he passed away, he gave me the best toy I ever had, which was an automated little Popeye doll. You wound it up, and wind-up toys weren't a big deal back in the 50s, meaning they weren't around, at least that I know of. And he got me that, and I was in heaven. And whenever I think of my grandpa, Manny, hi, Grandpa, I think of that Popeye doll. So I started there, but quickly I went into Abbott and Costello. I started getting, we'll say, more sophisticated. And this is all when I was in New York. So this is all pre 8 years old. Then I got into Laurel and Hardy. Loved Laurel and Hardy. Was watching Abbott and Costello too, but I got tired of the slapstick. Laurel and Hardy, on the other hand, they were phenomenal. And I will still watch Laurel and Hardy, and I recommend everybody. Yes, it's black and white, but Laurel and Hardy, incredibly funny. And then moved on ultimately, but not then, to the Marx Brothers, who were still my favorite comics. But I also, I grew up on Looney Tunes cartoons. Warner Brothers cartoons were ubiquitous on all the channels. Back then, there was no cable, kids. And so it's just, in New York, it was Channel 2, Channel 4, and Channel 7 were the networks. And then 5, 9, and 11 were stations that just aired whatever was available. Luckily, what was available were old movies, because you got to understand, and I don't think most people do, back in the 30s and 40s, when the movie studios were independently owned, and they were also tied into theaters, a movie would come out every week, okay? Even Gone with the Wind, it came out and they would run for a week, and that was it. It wasn't like, oh, it's held over, because they had, and that's why you have so many movies in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and even 50s, because movies would come out every week with a B picture as well. And then, of course, a short, etc. And so they had all this backlog of movies that nobody had seen in years. I mean, the few movies that would come back would be, Gone with the Wind, they would show on Broadway in a theater, every few years. Wizard of Oz, they would occasionally show. But now, all of a sudden, TV, which was new when I was a kid, you were watching all these Warner Brothers movies, and I was just, again, it was violent. I don't get it. Gangster movies, Bogart, Jimmy Cagney, George Raft, all those guys. And then, I started seeing Bogart like in Casablanca. I said, oh my God, this is a great movie. And so Here Comes Mr. Jordan. I'm a little kid, but that fascinated me. If you're not familiar with it, it's a boxer who is taken too early by some guy up in heaven named Mr. Jordan, and they're trying to find a body for him back on Earth because he was destined to become the boxing champ, but Edward Everett Horton took him too soon. That was my favorite movie as a kid. So I was more into movies than I was TV shows. Later on, My Favorite Martian, Star Trek, things like that, things that were more out of the ordinary. I wasn't a big, not a big sitcom kid, because the sitcoms back then were all family. Father Knows Best, The Donna Reed Show, Bachelor Father. These probably mean nothing to you, but they were all, again, Leave It to Beaver. Okay, they're all family. They were all pretty much the same show and the same plot lines. Beaver gets in trouble, has to explain it to his parents. So Mr. Ed, a talking horse. Again, I would watch them occasionally, but I was much more drawn to films. How's that for a long answer?
Would you say films was your primary hobby growing up, or what would you say something else was?
Yeah, I would say that's what I love to do best. My dad's a scientist, and he didn't know how to be a dad. They don't give you instruction manuals. I learned that. And so I never learned sports because he never learned sports. He grew up in Brooklyn, and we were living in Queens at the time. And in New York City, we did have one big gymnasium, okay, but the little kids didn't play too many sports, because I had a heart murmur. My mom, because she's a Jewish mother, oh my God, she wouldn't let me participate. So I wasn't really into sports, and my dad never bought me a football. Interesting story about my dad. He finally got me a baseball mitt in 4th grade, but I'm left-handed, okay? And he didn't know, and so he got me a righty glove, okay? Which, if you put the wrong glove on you and you're throwing with your other hand, you look like you're a girl, because you throw a baseball like this, okay? But, I couldn't do it. And I didn't know enough to explain to Dad. Ultimately, I did, and he was pissed off. I still remember, we had to go to a special sports store so he could finally get me a glove so that I could play rather poorly in the baseball games as a kid. But yeah, I would race home, and your mother's always, it's a beautiful day outside, go play outside, stop watching TV. But there were so many movies, again, the recycling of movies, I can't overestimate how the movie companies were so thrilled to now have an outlet for all the movies that they couldn't show in first-run theaters anymore. From literally, 1929 is when Talkies came out, Jazz Singer, and into the 50s when I was born. But by the 50s, TV and films were competing, and anyway, TV finally came into its own.
Where did you grow up?
The next building over, about 3 years ago. tell you her name.
Where were you when you were a legally young person?
Okay, well, again, I grew up in Queens, New York, until I was 8. Kind of hated it, and I hated it because growing up in New York, you can't, you can't really go out and play because it's New York City. Luckily, my dad was going to move either to Long Island or to New Jersey, and the advantage of New Jersey was right across the George Washington Bridge. There was a little town called Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey. And now they're all multi-million-dollar homes. But even then, it was million-dollar homes. It was way upscale. And because somehow my dad had made enough money in science. Dad's quite an inventor. And yeah, so New Jersey, which was very different from New York, I came out to New Jersey at the end of 3rd grade. Okay, so, and I didn't know anybody, but luckily the kid that lived next door didn't go to summer camp because everybody was so rich that even at the age of 8, these kids were all off to summer camp because A, they wanted to go, and B, the parents wanted to go take a vacation somewhere without their kids. Not so with my parents. So I didn't go to camp, but luckily there was one guy, his name is Dana Brand. Some people may know him. He became a very famous Mets blogger. He was head of the English department at Hofstra University, and we went to school together, and we became tight through that summer because we were the only kids in Englewood Cliffs. And what was great about Englewood Cliffs were the cliffs, because again, I didn't know sports, but all of a sudden, coming out of New York City, we had the Palisades. And if you're unfamiliar with, we have the Pacific Palisades out here in LA where I am, and we have the Eastern Palisades. And we would literally, without thinking or worrying about it, we would climb down the cliffs, we'd bike down to the cliffs, which again, were 5 minutes away. And you could get from my house in a car, you could get from my house to Manhattan in 12 minutes. Okay, because you go down my main street, you make a right, you get on the Palisades Interstate Parkway, 4 minutes later, you're on the GW Bridge. Once you're on the GW Bridge, you're in Manhattan, which allowed us to go. My dad loved Chinese food. So in 15 minutes, we could be in Chinatown, or we could be in Midtown or whatever. So that was great. But yeah, I spent so much time, and it's amazing I'm alive, but climbing the cliffs and finding the Undercliff Cemetery, which presumably didn't exist. And this is boring for everybody. I know, we'll get to game shows soon. And the 1800s, the 1700s, it was astonishing to me, these headstones, from hundreds of years ago. And it was all under brush and stuff, but Dana and I found it. Anyway, so.
That was pretty athletic.
Yeah, well, no, yeah, to an extent. Because again, sometimes we'd be climbing up, and there would be no place to go, and we didn't really want to climb back down, and so we would take crazy chances, and it's amazing, neither one of us fell. I mean, for Christ's sake, they fell on Til You Drop, which we'll get to later, running up and down stairs, but we never fell. So that was great. And then by 4th grade, now I'm going to a new school in New Jersey, all new kids, sure as, can I say shit? I just
say whatever you want.
Sure as shit. Dad gets me late to school. It's my first day in a new school, okay? And I'm in 4th grade. So I'm walking down the hall. Nobody is there. I'm guessing this is my classroom over there. And I open up the classroom door, and I'm scared. I was a very shy kid. I had a stutter, and I had a lisp. And 1 would be bad enough. 2, it was a nightmare. I walk into the class, everybody says, "Hey, Fred." They thought I was Fred Slobodin, another kid who had a big nose. And it's like, okay, what's this? And I went up to the teachers, hi, oh, you must be David Greenfield. Have a seat. Anyway, so slowly, I got to know the people. Dana was in my class. I met a guy named Jim Schlosser, who became my best friend ultimately. I spoke to Jim the other day. We're still tight. And yeah, it was just a wonderful experience because in the New York school system, I didn't feel I was learning anything. And in Jersey, first off, we had less kids in the class, and for whatever reason, they were brighter kids. You know, I'm not putting down New York City in a whole, but obviously, but Englewood Cliffs, I guess because the rich people were, I won't say brighter, but they were
well-to-do.
Well-to-do, sure. The kids were motivated, and we had great teachers. And you know, basically everything I learned from first grade to third grade went away, and by fourth grade I was learning. And by the time we got to eighth grade, you know, I was a straight A student, and yeah, I became very popular. Even though, well, I started to lose my stutter and lisp. I had to, because girls, I thought they liked me, but the reason the girls would talk to me is they would want me to say certain words like crispy, you know, because I would say it, I don't know if I can do it. Crispy. Yeah, I can't do the, you know, because they found my lisp very funny. It's not the way to get girls. But by fifth grade, I had a wonderful speech teacher. They would take us out of class, and that was the difference between upscale New Jersey school. They would take about 5 kids out of different classes, 4th through 8th grade, and sit with us, and we'd look in a mirror, and it's like, I'm never going to get it right. And then there was one day, it just clicked. All of a sudden, just clicked, and I could say the S word, which I'd never done before. I still remember.
Words with S in them, not the S.
Words, yes, I'm sorry. It's morning, okay? I need my caffeine. I only had one. Yeah, so, you know, I won't say that changed my life, but it made me more popular. And despite not being athletic, I had a sense of humor, which started to get me in trouble. And we had one kid, you know, Roger Green was the class clown, and he was the most popular kid. So I emulated him to the extent that, you know, yeah, I wanted to be a little outrageous. And if you sat in the corner, that made you popular. You know, they didn't put dunce caps on you, but, you know, like, David, stop talking, stop passing notes, stop doing this, whatever, you know. And so whenever you'd sit in the corner, which is the front of the class, you know, that would make you more popular. So I did that because I was a ne'er-do-well. Anyway, those are my earliest memories of, yeah, up until 8th grade.